Hello, I'm Dr. Piper Hudson, and soon we will have Dr. James Hudson joining us on this talk today, Cultivating Self-Awareness and Calm Through VR Design. Now, in case there are any low vision individuals, I am a late 30s female with long red hair, and I'm currently at our home in St. Charles, Missouri, with a fully maximalist design aesthetic around me. Today, we are going to be talking about the knowledge we've learned through neuroaesthetics and the way that AI can be augmented in education, cultural experiences, and other uses to help individuals become more aware of their own sensory preferences. Now, AI, of course, is going to be biased over the information that's fed to it, but it is going to help us with the ability to real-life feedback automatically. So EEGs and fMRI scans have a massed amount of neurological understandings to help us understand wonder. But when it comes to personalizing art experiences, curiosity, we often need to have a hyper-personalized approach as everyone experiences things differently. So we can start to take this knowledge that neuroaesthetics is giving us, that everyone experiences art in different ways, to tailor our experiences. This means we can create neuro understanding of our brains, of our preferences for specific art, of our sensory needs, of our dislikes, and create emotional engagement based off of our preferences even before we interact with an environment. How this could be incredibly helpful is for individuals who are not easily able to identify their emotions and the concept of expanding awareness on neurodiversity. All of our brains are different, and neurodiversity is the concept that there are some who adapted different from the neurotypical experience. And to understand how to enhance our ability to feel comfortable in spaces with vastly different brains and learning styles and sensory preferences, we can use these tools in an interdisciplinary approach. So what this means is we really have to think outside the box when it comes to neuroscience, technology, science, STEM, integration, all of it, to understand the impact of our nervous system, our physiological responses, and our emotional responses to our environments. And how this can really help is we can create a wonderful experience prior to visiting places. We can acclimate our nervous system, and we can create moments that have more opportunity for education and inclusivity. Neurodiversity and exhibition design is where I started. Our deep investigation came from the knowledge that technology departments were very quick to accept neurodiversity. That's the concept that there are individuals whose brains have adapted in different institutions, environments, situations, and this adaptation leads to a neurodivergent brain. That means that individuals who have brain trauma, ADHD, PTSD, autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia, all have different neurologically wired brains. Now, we have an estimate of 15 to 20% of the population. That is going to be those who are willing to label themselves on a box as being neurodivergent, so likely the numbers are much higher. The challenges of neurodivergent individuals, other than the bias of having a deficit in their brain, is the conventional settings for education, for entertainment, are very challenging for those who have sensory issues. And we've developed this understanding that most sites, once they become aware of individuals who are kinetic learners, tactile experience, proprioception, mandatory needs, it creates an opportunity for design to be different. Now, neuroarts is the field that came about where neuroscience and the physiological responses in the human body were noticed. And it's impossible to ignore that music and art makes us feel a certain way, has the ability to impact and emotionally connect us. But we were quite interested in how you can take that understanding and improve it with neuroaesthetics. So neuroaesthetics is a scientific discipline that studies how the brain responds to aesthetic experiences can be utilized to help people, to calm their sense of anxiety, to help them feel connected, to remove social anxiety situations and find the ability to merge through social experiences and different environments. So we know there's a measurable impact, and we understand that there are artists who are making the next innovative steps to helping our environments consider the impact on our brain and body. This is being utilized in lots of different ways. One of them, my personal favorite, are sensory art installations. As humans, we like to stay comfortable and in our own spaces, and most neurotypicals have a tendency to prefer visual information and followed by auditory. A lot of other individuals have kinetic needs through their hands, through their fingers, through their body movement, through their understanding in space. And designing these exhibits, which curate outside of the conventional white walls and long didactics, can really expand our mental health opportunities. Music therapy, we have seen that the earliest understanding in the neuroscience for ways that people are impacted is playing music communally, listening, and one of my favorites listed here is they've noticed that in dementia patients who are able to have nostalgic memories from their childhood and their teenage years stay in lucidity longer. So we know that there's opportunities to push our brains further when it comes to finding safe spaces where we can evolve if we feel comfortable doing so. Now, interactive AI, it can agitate some people, but it also can react to the viewer's mood, which is exactly what you want art to do. Is if it agitates you, it helps you investigate why. If it calms you, that's a tool that we could help people better understand their own experiences to have that moment of art and calmness if they need it as a toolkit in their back pocket. The benefits of neuroarts are many. Stress reduction, the nervous system to be deactivated, to go into a place where we can learn and we can calm ourselves without being triggered into flight or fight. The nervous system that has a cortisol or an anxiety stressor or PTSD finds transitions or changes very difficult. So if we accommodate that knowledge prior into our design, we are allowing the brain to be more comfortable in that experience. Our brains are amazing things that have the ability to evolve and adapt through neuroplasticity, and we as designers, as artists, as curious individuals can tap into that to create more opportunities for inclusivity and cater to the learning needs in vastly different populations and ages and circumstances for their own learning needs and styles. Ooh, go back one more. There we go. The easiest way that we've noticed this to have a great impact was particularly in my preference of museum spaces and cultural institutions. In the UK, they have the opportunity for learning maps. These are quite simply an already designed blueprint of the building, modified to help individuals recognize potential trigger zones. Low lighting to bright light, having drastic smells, for me, having multiple light sources, which causes my brain to have frustration finding the colorization for that specific environment, is something that neurodivergent brains have to accommodate. So giving that prior knowledge, the more information, the better, alleviates the chance of a triggered nervous system and actually creates a sense of belonging and inclusion prior, knowing that a space cares enough to create this amount of detail. There are also the opportunities to play with sound and space and these triggers to help with that neuroplasticity. One has been historical soundscapes. So creating an immersive environment that takes one out of the kind of chaos in these particular white-walled spaces. And doing so, we also have the opportunity to expand accessibility for those who cannot physically get to a space. So digital twins, very commonly 360 cameras, there's now even an app. I learned about the technique at our university when they were doing it specifically to preserve historic sites. But I found that if you allow someone to walk through a space, whether they are a kid, whether they are an adult with anxiety issues, whether they are an individual who has never been to the site and just wants more knowledge, these digital twins allows for a friendly way prior and after to feel included in the space. Examples, there are some wonderful museums that are doing these opportunities to really utilize AI technology The Children's Museum of Pittsburgh is one that we see early integration of having people feel comfortable with the different ways that they can navigate into the space, personalized for each attendee. And then the British Museum did the virtual reality tour, but they took it one step further, where they allowed the individuals to time travel through their collection in order to go deeper into what really gets you excited and what you'd want to see at that space. The Bones and app, the Skin and Bones app, and the Access Smithsonian. Smithsonian is a steamship when it comes to understanding inclusion and having the opportunity to innovate. Their Access Smithsonian is another understanding of the environment to give feedback to the individuals. We're also seeing that museums are now utilizing literal biofeedback from wearable devices, from haptic devices, or from registered technological sensors in the environment to allow for the accommodation of space. What has the highest rate of interest? When are the crowded spaces most chaotic? And using that data to feed back into their app to help people be more accommodating for their own needs when they come to visit. And so the Copper Hewitt are also considering these same ideas of accessibility and ability. How do you make someone feel less about needing to be accommodated in your spaces and more independent and able themselves to enjoy it? So museums are using these principles of universal design, understanding that there's a range of sensory needs and sensory-friendly resources, such as the maps, toolkits, sensory kits that allow for fidget devices or sensory items to help them through the experience. Tours that can transport them into sensory engagement and educational enjoyment of the facility. We see that the reduction of anxiety, the amount of times that individuals seek out information prior to then acclimate their experience are only increased with these tools. And they're really driving that interest of how do we cater and how do we help individuals who may have some neurological challenges when it comes to learning and design and space needs. Sensory enhancement. We often forget that we are more than just visual and auditory learners. So upping the ante with sensory experiences. Though the world is vastly visual, there are those who find visual information overwhelming and audio therefore gets defaulted. So almost hacking the human brain to bypass the normal types of investigative ways is another way to really dive deep into our own curiosity. The parasympathetic activation. Our nervous system can go into flight or fight, or it can go into a state of relaxation and digestion, and it's in that state that we are able to absorb sensitive sensory material without it being negatively impacted in our bodies. That's hard to do. We live in a world where disability is often a framework in an ableist society, where others feel very much that we are not inherently disabled. It is the environment in which we find ourselves forced to abide by certain rules that places us in our uncomfortable disabled state. Just knowing that is revolutionary for some individuals who are unaware of the sensory information others have to perceive at all times. The cultural and emotional impact of validation, not only in the awareness, but also in the understanding of this kind of cultural attitude, is incredibly important, not only to neurodivergents, but to those who care for them, who love them, and live in America where there is a very biased understanding of disability. And this psychological growth. If you are expecting an individual to grow in an area that they do not feel comfortable in, it is really against the way that our human bodies grow. We also notice that there's a large kind of co-occurrence between populations of young individuals who learned their identity at a time only through a screen, neurodivergent individuals who find social interaction very challenging, and the growing elderly population who are also having drastic states of loneliness and loss of cognitive ability as they get discluded in these educational experiences. Psychological growth, understanding of self, these are all key things that we need as human beings. Self-awareness is a tool that we must adapt and grow, that is not easily learned. So all of these things can.
Thank you so much for joining us. As you just heard from Dr. Piper Hudson, we have done quite a bit of research in the sensory processing conditions of various neurotypes, and what we found was that there was a higher incidence of crossover of sensory stimuli with those that were neurodivergent and or had conditions such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia. So we conducted a neuroart study looking at the physical impact of art on the brain and the physiology of our bodies. And what we found was those that were synesthetes, or those that experience synesthesia, which are crossovers, the most common being seeing sound and or hearing colors, for instance. We found that there was a consistency with how different neurotypes presented. Thereby, it was not random that some had color synesthesia versus sound versus calendar versus mirror touch, etc. And so our study focused on how do we identify what types of sensory processing do people prefer, and thus allow us to customize these experiences. So what we found, as you can see here as an overview, is that when we broke down all the data that we collected, we found that certain neurological conditions presented with typical synesthesia types and a particular type of art that they preferred. Thus, we could extrapolate from this more broadly how we can better understand ourselves and how we all process information differently. Now, once we had that information, we needed to look at what to do with it. So we developed a diagnostic tool to help people understand how they process information, how they process these experiences. And so we wanted to have a type of checklist that one could go through with, once again, a professional in an interview that we did, or on their own to better understand themselves. And we found that through the study, most people do not consider what they do or don't like, or they may be triggered by a particular texture or color or sensation, but not know why. And so we wanted to create something that would allow the identification of this, and thus would also help us understand what type of art we like and how to create environments that we find most relaxing. Now, the criteria that we have for the sensory profile quizzes included, of course, sensory sensitivity. I'll go through all the questions here in a moment, but this involves, once again, measuring one's threshold for various types of sounds. Maybe you like a quiet environment, maybe loud noises might trigger you. For instance, if you have PTSD, there are other tactile stimuli, certain textures that people could not stand. Also, emotional reactivity. How does one react to stresses in the environment? And also aesthetic preferences. What type of visual aesthetics do people like? Do they like abstract art, realistic art? Do they like things that are going to be in motion versus still? We find those with ADHD like digital art and things that were in motion, for instance, to keep their attention. And then cognitive styles. So the process that we took for the interviews, though we did get quite a bit of information from the surveys themselves, we wanted to have other qualitative measures and delve more deeply into one's experience over their lifetime when they first were diagnosed with a particular condition, such as autism, when they first had a synesthetic experience, or the first time, for instance, that they were listening to a song and they vividly saw certain colors. So what we looked at was the diagnostic criteria, that being what people like and do not like. So we went through preferences of various types of environments, sounds, smells, to dislikes, right? So what do they find uncomfortable, distressing? And the idea was that in order to discover what these were, we could create a sensory environment or sensory conditions that improve general well-being. And then we also found patterns for artistic preferences and were able to then look at what type of artistic engagement they would like. Here's the actual questionnaire. We went through each section of the diagnosis. So for instance, were they diagnosed with autism or dyslexia or dysgraphia, and at what age? Are they self-diagnosed? Because it's very difficult to get an adult diagnosis of autism. To their synesthesia type, that being, do they have chromosynesthesia? Do they, once again, hear colors and or have certain tastes when they see certain colors? And then preferences. What type of art do they like? What environment is most relaxing to them? What type of lighting do people like? And so on and so forth. And by looking at the likes and dislikes in combination with one's type and how one processes information, we're then able to have an ideal environment based on those answers we can put together, such as, low lighting, diffuse lighting, what type of environment, sounds. Do you want to hear the ocean? Do you like birds? Do you want complete silence, right? Those that were that had vision impairment, for instance, preferred an equal distribution of swirling colors, right? Because it overwhelmed them. If there was one direct light source, it hurt them, as an example. And so from this, we developed examples, as you see here, for personalized aesthetic experiences. And this is statistically the most pleasant kind of interior space that people liked. That being low and diffuse lighting. They liked plant life in their space, but they still wanted to be inside and feel safe, but have an opening to where you can look outside. So an open window, right, at not a bright part of the day, but at the evening time, for instance, hearing birds right off in the distance with a rather comfortable and inviting interior space like couches, pillows, throws, things like that. So this is what most people found to be the least triggering. Now, in order to create this, we need to think about what tools you'll be using for this class. Now, of course, you can use the art generators that we're going to talk about that we did for the study, because it allows us to very rapidly put these things together, right, and then present it to individuals to see if it accurately reflects what they would find to be the most pleasant. So DALL-E 3, which is going to be embedded in ChatGPT 4 Turbo, Midjourney, once again, if you prefer photorealistic kind of renderings, and then Stable Diffusion, which has the largest data set. And of course, the most common platforms that you're using. Unity is, of course, the old workhorse that does very well and has a lot of these XR rigs already in a template for you. Unreal is amazing at real-time rendering of billions of polygons, if that's what you're looking for. And then we'll talk about Spatial, a kind of out-of-the-box solution that requires very little expertise. Now, what we're going to see in the very near future is going to be exactly what you saw in the movie Minority Report. You already say that you need something or mention a particular product in one room. Whatever AI device that you have, whether that's going to be Siri or Alexa, is going to pick it up. And then the next thing you know, you scroll through social media and you have an ad for that product. That's not a mistake, right? That's targeted types of advertising. And so we're going to see a lot of money put into this in the development for advertising and marketing purposes. That being able to appeal directly to you based on your own preferences and who you are in your profile. But bringing that back down to where we're at today, we can still create relatively rapid prototypes of what would be relatively comforting for various individuals. Whether you seek stimuli or you're overstimulated, right? We can look at the different ways. This, once again, is going to be the ideal scenario for an individual who proposed to his wife at a duck pond. And so this is his flashbulb moment that was his go-to for his favorite relaxing aesthetic experience. But what we're going to do in creating our own Neuro Sanctuary, as we'll call it, is going to be understanding prompt engineering. We'll cover how to generate these images, then convert them to 3D models, and then we'll follow up by integrating that into an XR platform. No, prompt engineering is really going to be the way in which we tell these new generative AI tools what to do and what to output with all of the billions of parameters of information that they have been trained on. So the importance for the exercise today, you can go into your tool of choice, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, even Crayon is free, whatever you prefer, just to understand the process. And you want to have a very clear prompt as to what you want. So don't just say a nice, pleasing sunset on the beach, right? So no, it needs to be very specific like this. So you need to start thinking through, once you interview someone, and ideally you would be interviewing someone else in the classroom, so try to make another student's ideal scenario by going through the questionnaire that we provided, right? In such a way that you could then say an interior space designed with an emphasis for comfort and tranquility. The room, notice, features soft diffuse lighting. So we went through lighting, we went through location. We talked about the ambiance, suggestive of a sunset. We know that we want plants, so we want lush green plants strategically placed around the room. We want a focal point of a large window, giving us the chance to look out while still feel safe and protected inside. And then your furniture is going to be inviting and plush, right? So we're not worried about hurting anything and or questioning whether or not we can sit on something. It's very inviting. And so we need to go through the checklist of, where it is, the textures, the lighting, what type of sounds might we be suggesting with the birds outside, etc. So this is the prompt to get this image right here. Now, once we have that two-dimensional image, we can then convert it to a three-dimensional model. There are lots of tools out there to do this now. So once you have the image of the room we just showed you, you can use Google's Dream Fusion, Microsoft's 3D Builder, Selva 3D. There are many others. It's whatever you prefer. Google and Microsoft are the two most common, so you can use the links here if you would like. But we find that you are going to take that 2D file, right, saved as a JPEG or a TIFF, right, and then upload it into these models. Now the models, as you can see here, are going to give step-by-step instructions, all of them. And you can also, if you're using anything like Google Gemini, ChatGPT-4, Mistral, any of these, you can also ask it to connect live to the internet and give step-by-step instructions and to recommend the best solutions. But you would first, of course, install Microsoft 3D Builder, you upload your image, you then convert it, right? You want a contour or a height map. Then you can decide if you need to have these edges and borders, and then you can adjust it as needed. Now, integrating it into an XR platform, relatively straightforward. You open either Unity or Unreal Engine. Here is Unity. You go to your Assets menu at the top of the interface, and you select Import New Asset from the drop-down. And this, of course, you then now upload your 3D model file that you had saved from the previous example. Again, step-by-step instructions are available via just going to Google, or you can go to your AI of choice. And they're also built in with these templates for these platforms. So once you're finished, adjusting the settings that you would like and how you want the three-dimensional space to look, you can then finalize and export it with your import button here. Now, if you are not as comfortable using Unreal or Unity and don't want to go through the process of creating an AI image and then converting it to 3D, you can use out-of-the-box solutions like Spatial. There are many examples like this that are drag and drop now, to where you can look at different examples that they have, bring in JPEGs and or two-dimensional images to skin, right, three-dimensional spaces, right? So for this, you can just log into Spatial, create new space, choose the environment that you would like that most closely aligns with the aesthetic criteria for the diagnostic checklist that you had, and then you can create your own space that's navigatable either through desktop or through VR headset. For more on the diagnostic aspects of the study, which are really the most important, as technology continues to evolve, you're going to see more and more flexibility of these tools to where we'll be able to just say what we want. But the problem is most people don't know what they want. And so that's the most important takeaway for this presentation is knowing yourself, or helping people understand what they find that's going to be pleasant to them or off-putting in order to get them to a particular state of mind or emotion. The tools then, we can then decide which will be best in order to augment that. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email either one of us at phudson or jhudson@lindenwood.edu. And of course, we're happy to answer any questions and provide more information.